All right, for the assignment, again, you're going to create an abstract composition only using 6 rectangles, different sizes and shapes, and only using black. And I put examples down here of what works, what doesn't work. I'll start over here with not successful. Why do you think this is not that interesting? Yeah, they're all kind of the same size, and what you discover in graphic design is when you have things that are identical, like these darker ones, visually they kind of cancel each other out. So, and you'll notice they're all kind of in this medium gray range. So there's not a really variety of value. Value is what we call between black and white and levels of darkness or lightness. So this is a much more successful composition. I've got different shapes. Some are really long and narrow, some are tall, and then I've got different tones. And remember I showed you that shapes and shapes, with the windows. As you do this, we're going to play with opacity and be cognizant of the rectangles you're making where these overlap on here. So, two other things to avoid in here. I mentioned, I believe last week, the human eye will always go to where there's the most contrast. So that could be black on white, white on black. We also tend to always go to maybe the larger object on the page. So if you make the largest rectangle, in this case a square, also the darkest black, this is going to completely overwhelm whatever else you do on the page. You'll notice up here in the one that I said was more successful, the smallest shapes are the darker ones, and as you get bigger, they get lighter. That way it helps balance the combination. Normally, you're drawn to the smallest shape because it's black on white, but you're also drawn to the biggest shape, and that's the lightest one on here. So you play with that opacity to get to it. The other thing you always want to do, and one of the reasons this one up here is not successful, everything's kind of floating in space. And so why this one's a little bit more successful is at least one or two of the shapes touches the edge of the format or the edge of the page and helps ground it. And that's going to make it much more successful. The one thing you want to avoid, though, is if everything touches the edge of the page, now the most important thing on the page is the edge of the page. So it's finding the sense of balance in here. So what you want to do is, in Illustrator, go ahead and create a new document. I want you to do letter size, all right? And it should show up here if you're in inches. Sometimes Illustrator defaults to pixels or points. But if you don't see letter 11 by 8.5 up here, you can create it yourself. You want it 11 inches wide, 8.5 high. Click here in the horizontal landscape orientation. We're only going to do one artboard. And then what I want you to do is just draw black rectangles. So default is always black, white rectangle with a black outline. One thing you want to be careful of, though, is when you do this, the default also puts a white outline on here. So go ahead and make that none. And even though we can't see it, this one has it too. And once you do that, so what you want to do is start with 6 rectangles. And then what you want to do is, let's play with various sizes and shapes on here. So I'm going to make this very small. Maybe I'll do a really horizontal one. Maybe this one will be tall and skinny. Maybe this one will be my huge one. And for this one, you can play with the opacity. And what that is you can make these kind of transparent. So this is my biggest shape. I don't want to draw too much attention to it. So opacity is up here in the control panel. If you lower that, I can make it very light. So as you go around here, you might want to play with what looks good. Now remember, as you lower the opacity, you're going to be creating rectangles, as you can see through each other here. And as you do this, you can always change your shapes as you're going along to try and create a better composition. Maybe this one will anchor to the edge. You can grab those handles on the side. Maybe this one will be a little bit darker but still transparent. So you can see where these overlap and you create more shapes. And I'm going to drag this one and maybe anchor it on this side. So I'm creating interesting shapes around the page. None of my rectangles look the same, size and shape. Maybe this one's still a little bit too dark, so you can lower that again. So, you want to make sure that you have a variety of rectangles. They're different sizes, they're different shapes on here. As you work with this, and as you have things overlap, be cognizant of the rectangles you're making between the two that are overlapping. Maybe this one can go down here. Maybe this goes a little skinnier. But look at this, like with the line assignment, I created this kind of cross shape. Maybe that's not great, so maybe this will go shorter and not intersect it. At least one of your rectangles should touch the edge of the format. You know, 3 is probably the max. I would do 1, 2, or 3. And just play around with this on here and see what composition you think looks good. And as you're doing this, also be really cognizant of that negative space, the white space that's around your shapes. And if you can vary that as much as possible. So looking at the white space, the page, I notice, look at the white space, the width of it here and the width of it here. It's kind of identical. So maybe this goes closer to the edge. So now this is much skinnier. Then maybe this has to move over. So like the other assignment, there is no one right way to do this. It's really kind of training your eye for composition on here. Maybe having the darkest, smallest shape, maybe this goes smaller. So the assignment is twofold here. I'm trying to teach you how to use some of these tools in Illustrator. And I'm looking, you know, this width here is very similar to the width up there. So maybe this goes a little narrower that way. So really play with the shapes and in particular look at the negative space around here. And then when you get a composition you like, go ahead and save it. And here's, I think, what tripped a lot of people up on the line assignment. Several of you weren't able to upload your assignment. And the reason for that is I've restricted the format you can upload. You can only upload a PDF. What I want you to get in the habit of doing, though, on these assignments is saving them 2 different ways. The first way is save as. Now, I'm saving on my computer desktop. You can save to your Creative Cloud account and always have it with you. You can save it on the desktop, and then if you want to email it to yourself, you can, or if you want to upload it to a cloud account that you already have, or if you want to get a thumb drive and save your work on there. I will say this about thumb drives. We find so many of them stuck in the machines, in the hallway floors, under the desks. If you do want to save your work on a thumb drive, first of all, realize thumb drives are really only for transportation. I would not put my portfolio on a thumb drive. The other thing I would do is the minute you put a thumb drive in here, change the name of it to your cell phone number. That way, if we do find them on the floor or in the parking lot, we can plug them in, we can see your cell phone number, we can tell you, hey, we found this outside the building. And if they're turned in, they always get turned in across the hallway to the lab technician. But for me, I'm going to save this on the computer, and I'm just going to put it on my desktop. Always save all your files with your last name. Now, as I get to know you and we start working on more unique projects, I can probably tell whose work is whose. But with everyone doing rectangles, I'm not going to know whose is whose. So always save everything with your last name. This is assignment 2, so just put that in there. And as I mentioned, always save everything 2 different ways. One way, I'm going to save this as the default Illustrator, and I'm going to save it to the desktop. That's my working file. I can always go back, reopen this, make changes to it, resave it, save it as something different. And it's not that big a deal on these early assignments, but when you get into your logo design, you want to have a working file that you can open up and make changes to, but you also want a file that you can send to clients. And that's the second way. And in this case, I am your client. So save it a second way. I'm going to come down here and also do save as. And this is what tripped a lot of people up when they tried to upload their files. You cannot upload an AI file to Canvas. What you have to do is come down here where it says Format, change that to Adobe PDF, and hit Save. And I always check this. It's not a big deal on these early assignments, but I always should check View PDF after saving. That will pop it up and give me one last look before I do send it off to a client or something. The other thing too, you'll notice on my actual Adobe document, some of my rectangles overlap the edge. When you save the PDF, it's going to crop that out. So if I hit Save PDF, that quickly, it saved it, it popped it up here for me to look at. You can see my rectangles touch the edge. It all looks good. And this is what you're going to upload to Canvas for this assignment. All right, any questions?
I noticed that when I saved it to a PDF, it was able to open back up in Adobe Illustrator. Is that usual?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll show you that, which is fine. Yeah, if you create it in Illustrator, and I'll show you this. So on my desktop now, so here's my AI file, here is my PDF. Now if you just click on a PDF, it's always going to open in Adobe Acrobat or any other PDF reader. But the trick with Illustrator is if I take my PDF file and I just come here and drag it on the Illustrator file, it will open up as an Illustrator file. Now, that isn't true of a lot of the other Adobe software. When we start working with Photoshop, that's where it's going to be really important that you save this 2 ways, because if you can save images as PDFs or other options. If you drag it onto Photoshop, it will probably still open, but you will lose all your layers and effect. It'll just be a flat image, so that's going to be more important. But Illustrator is unique in that, yeah, you can open up the PDFs. Why is this important? Well, once we start working with type, say let me choose a funky font here. Say I find this super cool font online that I want to do a job in. All right, that looks great. And I do my job with it, and I save it as an AI file, and I send it to my client. If the client does not have this font, it will scramble it and put a default font in there. And for logo designs, that's a real problem. If I save this as a PDF and the client opens it up, they will see it exactly as I did it, even if they don't have the correct fonts, even if they don't have the images that I used in it. So that's why it's very important to always save a working file and also a PDF that you can send to your clients. But we will get to type, I believe, next week. Any other questions? All right.